inside? Right? 21. चलो 5 मिनट देख लेती हूँ. अच्छा टोटल अटेंडेंस कितनी आ रही है? सारे स्टूडेंट्स आते हैं एंड में? हैं? ये तो 40s में नहीं चले गए हैं? 30s में आ. अच्छा अच्छा जी. Assalamu alaikum. Now we're going to start the development of individual organs of head and neck. That is taking what is the basis, how what is the format from where all the organs are going to develop of the head and neck. We talked about the development of the skull, the basal part of the skull. So now the topic is development of head and neck. It's a long topic, taking each part individually. At fourth week of human development, the structure of the head and neck, that is the neck area, which is going to form all the different structures of the head and neck, that resembles that of a fish. That is a fish embryo, which was there at that stage. That is something what we call as gills, that is seen in this. If you see this picture, that is the gills which are seen, the small, and in this we call it the arches. That is the development, and this is the area from the base of the skull down to the neck. That is what all develops, and then this is called, because this resembles that development in the fish which gave rise to gills in the fish ultimately. But this is just a resemblance to that structure in case of fish, but it is not part of the gill formation, because human beings don't have gills. It's just the resemblance. So this was the reason that it had this structure, or this format was given the name as branchial apparatus. That is similarly in the fish, which gave rise to gills. But then it was seen that this area does not give rise to gills like the fish. So the name was changed, because this area in the neck, that is the part what we call as in human beings as the pharynx. So it was converted into something what we called as the pharyngeal apparatus, or that is from the pharynx. Now we've talked about the areas of the origin of the head. That is the front, the blue part, that was from your neural crest cells, and the red posterior part, that was from your pharyngeal mesoderm. That was the base of the head and neck. So now the next thing is we use the term. So it was said it is a misnomer, because gills don't form, but it is the pharynx region that it develops. So they said it is appropriate to change the name from branchial to the pharyngeal part. So it's called the pharyngeal arches or the branchial arches, but it is not just arches because arches are just one component of it. So it said that it is more appropriate to call it pharyngeal apparatus because it has three components to this apparatus. So that is why it has been given the name as pharyngeal apparatus. This contributes to the formation of the lateral and the ventral regions of the head and neck. All what is there, all the glands which are there, the muscles, the nerves, etc., etc., all this is formed by this apparatus. Now, and most of the anomalies which develop from while this is going on to its maturity, that is, they're given the name as branchial anomalies. So, this which takes place, these anomalies occur when during transformation of the pharyngeal apparatus into its adult derivatives. That is, when from incomplete development to the complete, those that is something when it is differentiating or maturation is occurring, that is the time when abnormalities, as we've already said, that is the time when abnormalities most liable to occur. Now, if you see this picture, this is just a diagrammatic picture which gives you an idea where we are talking about. We formed, if you recollect, we formed a neural tube in the upper portion, that is the ectodermal portion. Then we had a tube which was the notochord, and then we had the part below that was the endodermal component. Neural tube was the ectoderm, then this is the endoderm, and in between you're going to have the mesoderm. And then we had at the margins, we had the neural crest cells. Now it is said that, and I have told you that the mesenchyme of the head and neck is contributed by the neural crest cells, which are basically ectodermal in origin, but most of the mesenchyme of the head and neck is contributed by the neural crest cells. So this picture shows you that the neural crest cells, they are contributing to the mesenchyme, which is these arches that are yellow in color. These are the pharyngeal arches, something I showed you the previous picture, which resemble the gills of the fish, that they contribute to the mesenchyme of the arches from the neural crest cell. So that is how the arches are being formed, and the mesenchyme is being contributed from the neural crest cells. Pharyngeal apparatus. This is the primordial pharynx. That is, again, I say where the pharynx is developed. That is behind the oral cavity down till the upper part of the esophagus, and down to the esophagus. All this is going to, at the lower end of the esophagus, this is going to develop esophagus, the trachea, the glands around it. All this is going to, and the muscles, of course, in the ventral and the lateral aspect, they are going to develop from this apparatus. This primordial follicle, the pharynx, is bounded laterally by the pharyngeal arches. Formerly, it was just used as pharyngeal arches, the term pharyngeal arches. But then they said, no, pharyngeal arches, if you say, it just means one component of it. So it's more appropriate to use the term pharyngeal apparatus because pharyngeal arches are a part of the apparatus. So it's more appropriate to call them arches. I'll tell you what are the different terms or what are the components of this pharyngeal apparatus. Each arch consists of, or you can say the apparatus consists of a core of mesenchyme. That is, we are talking about the pharyngeal arches. The pharyngeal arches, they have a core of mesenchyme, that is mesoderm, externally by the covered by the ectoderm, and internally by the endoderm. This is again, yes, at the trilaminar structure. So this pharynx or the apparatus is formed by a core of mesenchyme in the center. Externally, it's covered by the ectoderm, and internally by the endoderm. The original mesenchyme, as we formerly said, is developing from the mesoderm, but then later on, the neural crest cells, as I've already told you, that forms the major source of the connective tissue components, including the bone, the cartilage, ligaments, all that is coming from the mesenchyme originating from the neural crest cells. Each pharyngeal arch is going to have its own components, that is an artery, a rod, that is the bony structure or the skeleton, the nerve, and the muscular component. So it is all in one. So a pharyngeal arch contains everything. It has a bony structure, it has a muscular structure, and it has nerves and blood vessels which supply it. So it is self-sufficient. Now, if you see this picture, we've said externally the pharyngeal arches, they're covered by the pharyngeal grooves. If you see this, the blue color, that is ectoderm, yellow is endoderm, that is lining the inside cavity, and the brown invert is your mesoderm. So externally, the pharyngeal arches are by these pharyngeal grooves, these depressions which are there. Then internally, the arches are separated by these pouches. These are the projections outpocketing from the inside. That is, the ectoderm is a cleft, endoderm is a pouch that is out protruding, and in between you have the mesoderm, and where the ectoderm and the endoderm they come in contact, and with the mesenchyme in the center, they form something what is called the pharyngeal membrane. So that is all the three layers together. They are going to produce a layer which is called the pharyngeal membrane. So basically, we have pharyngeal grooves on these depressions, the blue ones on the outside, or what we call as the pharyngeal cleft. Then you have the yellow one on the inside, that is the pharyngeal pouch. Then you have the mesenchyme, that is in the center. Those are given the name as pharyngeal arches. And then we have these pharyngeal membrane, that is the inner portion that is in between all the three layers. They are collectively going to form the pharyngeal membrane. So the pharyngeal apparatus basically consists of pharyngeal, from the outside it is pharyngeal arches, cleft. Then the middle is pharyngeal membrane or the pharyngeal arches. Inner side is pharyngeal pouches, and then linking the three together is the pharyngeal membrane. So they're basically four components of the pharyngeal apparatus. Now, pharyngeal apparatus has four components, that is pharyngeal arches, pharyngeal pouches, pharyngeal clefts, and the pharyngeal membrane, which is a combination. So if you see this picture, the inner side is this pouch that is outpocketing, that is the endodermal layer, that is what we call as the pharyngeal pouch, right? Then in the center, that is the round disc that you see, that is your pharyngeal arch. That is basically the pharyngeal arch. Collectively, it is not called, all the layers are not given the name as pharyngeal arch, but it is the pharyngeal apparatus. When you say pharyngeal arch, what is meant is the mesodermal or the central portion, which has its own skeleton, it has its own muscle, it has its own artery, and it has its own nerve, as it shows the picture. Then on the outer side, the red one, that is a cleft or a depression. This is from the ectoderm, it is called the pharyngeal cleft. And where these three layers meet, mesoderm, ectoderm, and an endoderm, that forms a membrane. So as this picture shows you, so it makes you very clear that from the outside to the inwards, ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, and where you have these three in the depression, the collective ones, there you have this membrane, which is called the pharyngeal membrane, and all these four together are given the name as pharyngeal apparatus. This diagrammatic picture, and the pharyngeal arch has its own four components: the skeleton, the muscles, the nerve, and the artery. The cartilage means its skeleton that is going to ultimately form. This is the pharyngeal arches. At the fourth week onwards, this type of appearance starts to develop in the developing embryo. These are what we call as the pharyngeal arches or the pharyngeal clefts or the branchial apparatus. This is at the level where you have from the oral cavity down till the end of the neck. That is why it is where the pharynx is developing. So that is why we call it the pharyngeal apparatus. And all the structures of the in relation with the pharynx they develop. Now, pharyngeal arch, as I've already said, contains a pharyngeal arch artery that arises from the primordial heart around the primordial pharynx to enter the dorsal aorta. So it has its artery that is coming from the dorsal aorta, which is developing. It has a cartilaginous rod, the muscular component of the head and neck, the sensory and the motor nerve supplying the mucosa, and the muscles derived from the arch. So these four are component of each pharyngeal arch. If you see this picture, this arch contains an arch artery, the red one. These are your, this is branchial apparatus. The inner side, which is protruding, one, two, three, four, that is the endoderm. This is your pharyngeal pouch. The outer one, the clefts, which is depressing inwards, that is your pharyngeal ectoderm or the pharyngeal clefts. The pink in between, that is your pharyngeal arch, that is your mesenchyme. The pharyngeal arch contains this skeleton, white one. Then you have its nerve, vein, and artery, and the muscular portion of each arch that you see. It has been numbered from inside. One is first pharyngeal arch, second, third, fourth. So each contains its own four components. Each arch has its individual components. First, we talk about the pharyngeal clefts. What is being formed by these pharyngeal clefts? If you take these pharyngeal clefts, if you see in this picture, that is the blue again is your ectoderm, and this is where you have your pharyngeal clefts. There are four in number, the four pharyngeal clefts. One, each cleft is going to contribute to the definitive structures. There are four clefts on the outside. Dorsal part of the first cleft penetrates the underlying mesenchyme and gives rise to the auditory meatus. If you see this flute, this is protruding inwards, inside, and this is what is going to give rise to external auditory meatus, that is from the outside, that is the external ear. It is forming the external ear. This goes inwards, it is lined by the ectoderm, so it's going to be supplied by this area of the skin which is being supplied by the outside. So it gives rise to the external auditory meatus. The epithelial lining at the bottom of the meatus participates in the formation of the eardrum. Now, eardrum is a barrier between your external and the middle ear. So, middle ear is contributed by the mesenchyme from the arches. Then you have and the endoderm. Then you have the ectoderm from the outside, and so you have both the layers, that is ectoderm, mesoderm, and an endoderm, and then these at sites where it combines with all the three layers, and this combination gives rise to the eardrum, that is between the external ear and the middle ear. So eardrum, as you can say, is going to be a component from all the three layers. The outside, which is facing the external auditory meatus, or your external ear, is going to be lined by skin, so it is going to be ectodermal in origin. That which is facing on the inner side of the eardrum is that is going to be the endoderm in origin. And then what is in between, that is going to be your mesenchyme, or your, so it is going to be your pharyngeal membrane. So you can see that this eardrum, outside, inside, middle, and back, is going to have a separate nerve supply, as it is a derivative from all these germ layers, right? So first cleft is going to give rise to the external auditory meatus, and its depth, that is where it is meeting. The yellow is your middle ear and blue is the external ear. Where the two are meeting, there you're going to develop your eardrum. So the outer surface of the eardrum is ectoderm from this cleft, and the inner one is the endoderm. Proliferation of the mesenchyme tissue in the second arch, that is the first cleft. That is the only structure which is going to develop from the clefts. Then from the second arch, if you see this picture, first arch, second arch, third arch, this middle picture, the proliferation of the mesenchyme of the second arch is going to grow so much, this long protrusion which is there, that it's going to overlap the third and the fourth arches. So these, when it overlaps, it becomes smooth. The clefts make the structure on the outside of the pharynx a smooth structure, which was there basically as clefts. So this smoothness is there, and what is all between the clefts and this long in increased second cleft, that gap which is there, that is given the name as cervical sinus. If the cervical sinus is, because it is at the level of the neck, so that is why it is called the cervical sinus. And if this is not obliterated properly, or there is some infection, discharge can start from this sinus, that is leading a tract from the inside of the pharynx to the outside. So the third and the fourth clefts lose their contact with the outside. If you see the third and the fourth in this diagram, the clefts form a cavity with ectodermal epithelium, the cervical sinus. This sinus ultimately is going to disappear, and you can see in the third picture that the outer surface of the pharynx becomes smooth. The first step was this first picture, then the second one, that is the cervical, that is just first one has formed the external auditory meatus, as you can see finally, and the second overgrows the third and the fourth, makes the outer surface smooth, and so your pharynx on the outside becomes smooth. So that is all what the pharyngeal cleft does. It just forms your external auditory meatus and a part of your eardrum on the outer side. You see this diagram again. This is the pharyngeal clefts on the outside, the one that is going to form your external auditory meatus, and inside it is coming in contact with the auditory tube or your middle ear, and where the two are meeting, it's going to form your eardrum. The rest, as you can see in this first picture, the second is overgrowing the third and the fourth clefts. Then ultimately it's going to fuse, and then you can see that all this surface becomes on the outside of the cleft. This becomes smooth. There is no communication or no depth. Only if a small pathway is left, that is, a small cavity is left, which can be linking up the external part of the pharynx with the internal of the pharynx, that can lead to a sinus, and this might lead to a discharge. Then the second part, so what we have said is pharyngeal clefts, which are ectodermal in origin. The first cleft is just giving rise to your external auditory meatus or your external ear and the outer part of your eardrum, which is ectodermal. The other clefts, they are going to, the second is going to overgrow and cover the third and the fourth cleft, and so that part is becoming smooth and nothing is left. Maybe a small opening persists there, which is what we call as the cervical sinus. And if there is an infection, or it can make a communication from the outside to the inside, that can be called as the cervical sinus, which can be discharged or which can lead to the fluid where discharge can be. Then we go on to the pharyngeal membrane, the next component of the apparatus. Now we said pharyngeal membrane is that portion where, if you see in this picture, this is on the inside is your endoderm, lining endodermal cavity, because endoderm lines all your body cavities, the body organs. So this part, this picture shows you on the inner side, it's going to be your endoderm, the outside is going to be your ectoderm, and the two where they are meeting in the middle is your mesenchyme. So where they are meeting, that part is where you are having your pharyngeal membrane, if you see in this picture. So again, this picture shows you the first one is your external auditory meatus on the outside. Inside from the endoderm is your tubotympanic recess, and where all these are meeting with the mesenchyme in between, it's forming your eardrum. Okay, so you can see the contribution by all the three layers. From where the epithelium of the grooves and pouch approach each other, the ectoderm and endoderm later separated by this mesenchyme, which is inside. This forms first membrane, that is the ectoderm, mesenchyme, and endoderm forms the tympanic membrane or the eardrum, that is at the level of the first cleft. Second, third, and fourth, as we've said, all the clefts are obliterated, so they do not give rise to anything. So it's just the clefts and the membranes. First cleft give rise to the external auditory meatus and external part of the eardrum, that is formed by the first pharyngeal membrane. So that is all. Second, third, and fourth, that does not give rise to anything. It's just closed, and then pharynx becomes smooth from the outside. Then is the pharyngeal arches. These pharyngeal arches are the central component, which is having its own, that is the mesenchyme. You see the red portion with the artery, nerve, and the vein inside, which is having its own formation of the different structures. Now, what is there? There are said to be four pairs of arches visible, which are externally visible. Fifth and the sixth arch, they said, is very small and it is rudimentary, and externally it will not be seen. So basically, what you have is four arches are basically going to give rise to certain structures. It forms the face, nasal cavities, mouth, larynx, pharynx, and the neck. So this is all what you have in the region of the neck. We formed the head, that is, we form the skull, we form the mandible, we form the hyoid bone. So all that was the head. This is the portion of the neck, that is the pharynx. So it just has four pairs of arches, which fifth and sixth becomes rudimentary. It's very small, or you can neglect it and you will not form anything from it. Then coming to it, what is the first arch derivatives? What is giving rise to the first arch? The first arch, as we've said, each arch is going to have its skeleton, it's going to have its muscle, it's going to have its nerve, it's going to have its artery. So the skeleton of this is going to be forming the cartilage, and then cartilage going on to the bone. This cartilage may give rise to the structure initially, that will what we, and then become bone. That will what we call it the intracartilaginous in origin. And if it might not be there, that is the cartilage finishes off, and just that mesenchyme in that area, it gives rise to the bone. So direct would be intramembranous. Now these arches, their first arch has two components. The cartilage they have, because that is its portion which is going to give rise to the bone. two processes. First arch has two parts, that is the maxillary cartilage, which is also called the cartilage that it contains is called the quadrate cartilage. If you see this first picture, number one is your first arch, and the cartilage, it has two components. That is, one part is the maxilla and the other part is your mandibular portion. So the maxillary portion is given the name, the cartilage that it is there, it is called as the quadrate cartilage. And the mandibular portion, if you see, that is the lower part of this, still the first arch, that is called your Meckel's cartilage. Now, maxillary part of this first arch, that is the quadrate cartilage, what all is it going to give rise to? If you see in this picture, that is, it's going to form the maxilla. As the name says, it's going to form the vomer bone, that is a part of the nose. Then it's going to form the zygomatic bone. If you see the skull and if you recollect all what bone is there underneath the eye, you have the zygomatic bone, and then part on the sides, we have the part of the temporal bone, right? And the rest of this is going to form the maxilla. The maxilla is going to form by the intramembranous ossification, right? The cartilage is by the maxilla is being formed by the membranous ossification. The rest is going to be formed by the cartilage that is there. So maxillary bone is membranous ossification. The other is the Meckel's cartilage. The Meckel's cartilage is basically the mandibular bone, the arch that is the mandibular process. That cartilage it contains is called as the Meckel's cartilage. Now, if you see this picture, that is the green one. The first one, that is the Meckel's cartilage, where you're developing the mandible. You have formed the maxilla. That was your first one. That was your quadrate cartilage. You've seen that it has formed a part of your squamous part of the temporal bone. It has formed your zygomatic bone, and it has formed your maxilla. So all this portion was for the maxillary process. Then the lower green part, that is, so both have been colored green because both are originating from the first arch. Then this lower part is the Meckel's cartilage, this green one. Now it is going to divide into three. A part which is near the temporal bone, that is called its dorsal part. A part which is there at the near the level of the chin, that is its ventral part, and the part which is in between. Every part is going to give rise different structures. The dorsal portion, as you can see, it is developing into two small bones. These are the ear ossicles, that is the small bones of the ear. Ear has three bones, malleus, incus, and stapes. First arch is just going to give rise, the dorsal part of the cartilage of the first arch is going to give rise to the malleus and incus. If you see these two green small bones, this is from the cartilage. Then the middle portion, this dotted part, that is the cartilage is going to regress, and it forms only the membranous part is going to form the anterior ligament of the malleus that is attached to the ear ossicle, and the sphenomandibular ligament that is attached to the sphenoid process and to the mandible on the lingula on the inside. So the cartilage finishes off in the middle, and it gives rise to anterior ligament of the malleus and the sphenomandibular ligament. Then we come on to the ventral end, that is just near to the front end of the Meckel's cartilage. This Meckel's cartilage finishes off, it forms the mandible complete, and that is again by your membranous ossification, but because cartilage does not contribute to the formation of this mandible, so it's just contributing to the malleus and incus. Then the first arch derivatives has it, as we said, it forms a skeleton, that is the cartilage and the bone. We've talked about that. Then it is going to form its bone muscles. The first arch, as it is related to your maxilla and the mandible, so it's somewhere near to your jaw bones. So it's going to be related with the muscles of mastication. You see muscles of mastication, mylohyoid, anterior belly of digastric, tensor tympani, and tensor veli palatini muscle. These are originating from the first arch. And the nerve supply, muscles of mastication, is your mandibular nerve. If you recollect, trigeminal has three components. The basic two components, that is the the ophthalmic and your maxillary, they are more sensory in nature, and your mandibular portion, posterior part, that is your motor part, that is supplying to the muscles of mastication, and anterior is more sensory in nature. Now, this is supplying the muscles, that is by the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve. As from this first arch, we are also developing the dermis of the face. That is why skin supplying is being supplied on the face by your trigeminal nerve. And what branches of your trigeminal nerve? It is mostly your ophthalmic and the maxillary, and a small portion of the sensory branches of the mandibular nerve, right? So the nerve supply into, because it is developing from this arch, so you can say the first arch nerve is trigeminal nerve as a whole. It has decided what branch supplies where, and these are the muscles. Now, one thing is very important to mention, that these muscles, they are developing maybe at the site where they're going to stay on for throughout life, or they develop from that site and they are migrated to another part of the body. Now, the important thing to remember is that the nerve, that is your trigeminal nerve, this is going to continue its nerve supply whether the muscle stays at the same position where it is developed or it's shifted onto another side. There, even the muscle would be supplied by the trigeminal nerve. So, this derivative of the first arch means anything which is originating from the first arch is going to get its nerve supply from the trigeminal nerve, whether that thing stays in its point of origin or that shifts on and locates itself onto some other side. So the nerve of this is going to tell you that it is developing from your first arch. So first arch nerve is your trigeminal nerve. Then we go on to the second arch. The second arch cartilage is what we call as rickets cartilage or hyoid cartilage. Because we've developed a mandible, below the mandible you are going to have is your hyoid bone. So that is why it's said to be more appropriate that it is going to be called as the hyoid cartilage or the rickets cartilage. Now, from the dorsal aspect, now we've seen in this, the mandible has been formed by intramembranous, it's the lines, the Meckel's cartilage, and then this in the center, the thin portion. This thin portion is where your ligaments are going to form, and the cartilage portion is the incus and the malleus, that is ear ossicles. Then the second arch, the third ear ossicle, that is stapes, that is going to develop from rickets cartilage or the hyoid cartilage. Then the middle portion is going to thin out, cartilage is going to finish, and this is going to form your stylohyoid ligament. And then the ventral portion of this second arch, all this blue portion, that forms this is the hyoid bone. The upper horn, that is the lesser horn, and the upper part of the body of the hyoid bone, that is going to form from the ventral part of this rickets cartilage or the hyoid cartilage. So, second cartilage, second arch gives rise to stapes bone, and the upper part and the lesser horn of the uh, hyoid bone, and the stylohyoid ligament, that is the middle portion where the cartilage finishes off. So you can see the blue depicts the derivatives of the second arch. Then the second arch muscles that are related to the second arch, they are the stapedius, that is from the stapes, stylohyoid attached to the stylohyoid ligament, posterior belly of digastric, auricular, and muscles of facial expression. And muscles of facial expression, they are supplied by your facial nerve, that is your seventh cranial nerve. So that is why the seventh cranial nerve, facial nerve, is the motor nerve to the muscles of facial expression or the muscles which are there. So we stay in the stapedius. When you have talked about the facial nerve, we said one nerve was there in the stapedius in the middle ear. Then the stylohyoid, posterior belly of digastric was being supplied, and the auricle was also getting the auricular muscles. All these and muscles of facial expression, they are supplied by the facial nerve. That is a nerve of the second arch. The nerve of the first arch was your trigeminal, which was the sensory supply of your face. Okay, and the motor component of it was being supplied to the muscles of mastication. So first is trigeminal nerve, second arch is facial nerve. And then if you see this picture, if you recollect, the first arch is malleus and incus. Then you have this ligament, that is the Meckel's cartilage, which is surrounded by the ligaments on the side. Just a small ligament is there, and it forms by the intramembranous ossification by for the maxilla is formed. Then is the second arch. This just cartilage dorsal part is being formed, and that is your stapes is formed. Then the central portion becomes membranous. This gives rise to a small portion of the stylohyoid, and then the stylohyoid ligament where the cartilage finishes, and the ventral portion. This black one, it is forming the superior horn or the small horn of the hyoid bone and the upper part of the body of the hyoid bone. that is formed from the second arch. Then we go on to the third arch. This third arch is the ventral part of this is going to form the greater part, that is the greater cornu, the black, and the body of the lower part of the body of the hyoid bone. These two things, they are going to be formed from the third arch. If you see this posterior picture, in this green part, that is the third arch, the greater horn that is behind, and this lower part of the body that is of the hyoid bone, this is being formed by the third arch, right? If you see in this, so this is lower part of the body, that is the cartilaginous portion. Fifth arch, fourth and sixth, they are very small. They're just going to give rise to the laryngeal cartilages, except the epiglottis, that is the tracheal ring. If you see in this sixth one, fifth is rudimentary and it is mostly absent. So from the third on, we go on to the fourth and the sixth, they're going to give rise to the cartilage. Because underneath this hyoid bone, you start the larynx, and this larynx is the upper part of the trachea, and this is going to be forming the laryngeal cartilages. That is, other than the epiglottis, all these cartilages are being formed by this fourth and the sixth arch. Fifth is a rudimentary structure. So you see this fourth and sixth arches, they are giving rise to the thyroid, cricoid, arytenoid, corniculate, and cuneiform cartilages. Epiglottis is formed from another source, right? Muscles of the third arch, they are, it's just one, that is stylopharyngeus. This stylopharyngeus, it is supplied by, the name tells you, it is the relation of the pharynx and the pharyngeal part, and that is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, that is supplying to the tongue plus your pharynx. That is, the name tells you, that is the ninth cranial nerve, the glossopharyngeal. So stylopharyngeus is being originating from this third arch, and the nerve of the third arch is your glossopharyngeal nerve. Then is the fourth arch. The fourth arch, the muscles which are developing from the fourth arch are your cricothyroid, the levator velar palatini, constrictors of the pharynx. So because this is the area of the pharynx that is there, and so the muscles of the pharynx, they are going to develop from the fourth arch, and the nerve of the fourth arch is your vagus nerve. Vagus nerve, and it is said that these muscles and the areas of developing from the fourth arch is being supplied by the superior laryngeal branch of the vagus, because vagus is supplying both your fourth arch and the sixth arch. So one branch is supplying to the fourth arch and the other is supplying to the sixth arch. Then is the sixth, we said fifth was rudimentary. That is, it is very small, it does not give rise to any structure. So then is the sixth arch. The sixth, all this is mesenchyme. That is the middle portion. Sixth arch, the muscles, they are the intrinsic muscles of the larynx, because we have lower down, we have reached the larynx. You see this picture. Okay, fourth and the sixth arch. All this, the pharynx, and the sixth one is mostly to the larynx. And this is going to give rise to the sixth arch. The bony portion was your thyroid, cricoid, all those cartilages. The muscles which are there are going to be the intrinsic muscles of the larynx. That is, the muscles which are originating and inserting into the inside of the larynx. And the nerve is also of the sixth arch is vagus nerve. This vagus nerve, 10th cranial nerve, and the recurrent laryngeal branch of the vagus is going to supply to the larynx. The superior laryngeal branch of the vagus, that is going to supply to the fourth arch muscles, and this sixth arch is being supplied again by the vagus, and it is going to be the recurrent laryngeal branch of the vagus. This diagram recollects, and collectively it's going to tell you what all these, that was taking each arch separately. Now we're going to collect all the nerves, vessels, muscles, what are going to develop. Now if you see in this first picture, this is the first arch, that is the first portion, that is part of this is forming the maxilla first side. Then this is the Meckel's cartilage, this the sphenomandibular ligament, as you can see the annular ligament of the and the bone that is there, these are being formed, and the ligaments, and the dorsal aspect was forming the malleus and the incus, and intramembranous the front portion that is going to form from the first arch. and the upper part, that is the maxilla, is going to be formed from the this first arch maxillary portion, and that is intramembranous, and the dorsal part is the bone that is going to form, it is your zygomatic bone, it is going to be your maxilla, it is going to be your temporal bone. All that is first arch. Then is the second arch, that is the green one. The dorsal part of the cartilage, that is your rickets cartilage, that is forming this stapes, the dorsal portion. Then it forms the styloid process, the bone that is formed. The midway between the cartilage finishes on just this perichondrium stays, and that forms the stylohyoid ligament. And the interior end or the ventral end of the second cartilage, this is going to form your lesser cornu of the hyoid bone, the upper part of the body and the lesser cornu. You can see the green portion. Then is the third one. This is going to form the body and the greater cornu of the hyoid bone. Fourth and the sixth forming your thyroid and the cricoid cartilage. You can see the light green is your first arch cartilage. Second is your the darker one. Third arch cartilage is this brown one, depicting what all is developing. Fourth and sixth cartilages are blue in number. Okay, and if you see this other picture, you are seeing the developing of the internal ear, that is from the first cleft. These are the clefts which are shown from the outside, and these are the bones and the muscles which are being formed from each arch. Then a collective presentation of the muscles. First arch, muscles of mastication, mylohyoid, diabelia of digastric, tensor tympanoid, and intervallicular. So by the muscles of mastication, you should say it is trigeminal nerve. Then stapedius, stylohyoid, diabelia of digastric, muscles of facial expression. No way of going wrong. It is your facial nerve. Stylopharyngeus is your glossopharyngeal nerve because it is related with the pharynx, and glossopharyngeal is of the pharynx. And then these fourth and the sixth, larynx and the pharynx, they are being supplied by your vagus nerve, the two branches of the vagus nerve. So this is a collective presentation of the muscles which are being originating. Then the muscles you see in this picture, again it is shown by different colors. The first arch muscles from the outside, it is shown the yellow color. Second arch muscles, that is the rustish color. Third arch muscles is the blue one, and fourth and sixth is this purple one, right? So all this, if you see this yellow muscles, that was the muscles of mastication, masseter, temporalis, so medial or lateral pterygoids, all these are originating from the first arch. Then the second one, we said muscles of facial expression, all the muscles of the facial expression, you can see that is the second arch. The third arch is these blue one, that was only your stylopharyngeus, that was of the pharynx. And fourth and sixth, that is the pharyngeal, the constrictors of the pharynx, if you see this purple one, and the laryngeal muscles which are there. So this diagrammatically or with the colors, it shows you what all muscles are developing, and this is the external sort of a key or a chart giving you the idea from what muscles are arising from what part. Then is the nerves which are supplying to each portion. If you see this, this is again a diagrammatic representation, first, second, and then you have the ninth and the 10th nerves. That is the third and the fourth and the sixth arches that are there. Fifth is rudimentary. First arch is your trigeminal, maxillary, mandibular. Maxillary and ophthalmic is basically going to be your sensory supply, and mandibular is going to be your motor supply, that is to your muscles of mastication. Second arch, facial nerve. You see this, that is of the face. Second arch. Third arch is glossopharyngeal nerve. You can see depicting in the third arch, and fourth and sixth vagus nerves. The superior laryngeal and the recurrent laryngeal nerves, they are going to be there. So this diagram shows you individual nerve. First one was your trigeminal, second was your facial, third is glossopharyngeal, and fourth is your vagus. The fourth and the sixth both. This is a collective representation of the nerve plus the muscles which are originating. Now, arch number one is this blue diagram. Blue color has been given to it. Arch number one was your muscles of mastication. Then you have the diabelia digastric, tensor villi, palatini, all those muscles apparent, all supplied by the first arch, and first arch is your trigeminal nerve. So this is the blue. This shows you all these muscles. Then the second arch, that is your pink one, that is your muscles of facial expression mostly, and it is going to be your facial nerve. Okay. Then you have the third arch, that is your stylopharyngeus. That is, if you see this one, and it is supplied by your glossopharyngeal nerve. That is the blue one, that is of the third arch. fourth arch and your sixth arch, these orange and yellow, and the arrow that is there, that is going to be the muscles of the pharynx and the larynx, and they are being supplied by your nerve, that is your vagus nerve. So this picture collectively tells you the different nerves which are arising from the and supplying to the muscles of each part, and what muscles are arising from the individual arches. Then this is a collective chart which is showing you what all is arising from what arches. For the pharyngeal arches, the first is mandibular and maxillary component. These nerve supply is trigeminal. Then muscles which are there is muscles of mastication, that is mylohyoid, interior belly, and tensovilli. All those bony portion that is going to form maxillary portion is going to give rise to maxilla, premaxilla, zygomatic bone, part of the temporal bone. Meckel's cartilage, this is going to give rise to your mandible. And the mandible and the malleus and incus, that is the dorsal portion, that is the ossicle of the ear, and anterior ligament of malleus and sphenomandibular ligament. The inner portion that is going to finish off, the cartilaginous portion is going to finish off, and that is going to give rise to the anterior ligament of malleus and the sphenomandibular ligament. Then is the second arch, that is the hyoid arch or the rickets arch. This is being supplied by your facial nerve. This facial nerve is going to supply to the muscles of facial expression. So that is the second arch. All the muscles of facial expression, they are originating from this. And the bone that is arising is the dorsal portion is giving rise to the third ossicle of the ear, that is the stapes, and the small bone, that is the stylohead just next to it. And then the portion in the center which finishes off, it's just the membranous part which is left, that is going to give rise to your stylohyoid ligament. And then the ventral portion is going to form the lesser horn and the upper part of the body of the horn, right? That is, then the third one is the glossopharyngeal nerve that gives rise to the third arch, gives rise to stylopharyngeus supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, and the greater horn and the lower part of the body of the hyoid that is going to originate. That is, this is just telling you what bone is going to arise from what arch and what muscles are going to arise and what nerve is going to supply to that. So it is a collective. So if you want to remember the derivatives, this is a very good way of remembering it, but first you have to understand. And then fourth and the sixth ones supplied by the vagus. Then the laryngeal and the pharyngeal muscles, they are going to arise from it. And then you have the skeleton, that is your laryngeal cartilages, that is thyroid, cricoid, erythroid, corniculate, and cuneiform. And I said nothing with the epiglottis. That is another area which is going to arise from, the epiglottis is going to arise from there. So this was something in brief about the pharyngeal apparatus. We are going to talk about the pharyngeal pouches. In next time, this you recollect, you understand what all is going to form in that. It's all individual organs are being going to form. So we are going to go slowly and talk about the individual organs, because individual organs are going to have two components. That is, one is your the stroma, and the other is going to be your parenchyma. Stroma is all connective tissue. We talk about from where does the stroma of this organ develop. And then the other part that we talk about is the parenchyma, that is the secretory portion of that organ. So we talk about whether it is developing from the endoderm or from the ectoderm or from where else, and then we form it. Maybe an organ forms, some portion is formed from the endoderm, some from the ectoderm, and some from the mesoderm. So we have to talk about that. And then we also talk about the abnormalities which can occur in the development of these structures. So I recollect all what we have done up till now so that you understand what is pharyngeal apparatus, because this is the important thing which is related with your dental portion. Okay. The development. At this, we say the formally the term branchial apparatus was used because it resembles the structure gill. The fish also have these arches on the portion that were formed, and it resembled that of the fish, but in the fish they gave rise to the gills, so they were called the branchial apparatus. But then, because in the pharynx, this is at the level of the developing pharynx, they do not give rise to gills in human beings, so it is that it is not to be used as branchial but to be called as pharyngeal apparatus, okay, or the pharyngeal arches. This is exactly what the pharynx is, that is from the base of the skull down to hold of the neck. This is, it forms the front and the sides, all the structures, muscles, etc. And all this is going to arise from this pharyngeal apparatus. And the abnormalities are called your pharyngeal apparatus. And this occurs when the undifferentiated goes on to differentiated, and on the way it can be derailed. Pharyngeal apparatus, it has a portion, these are arches, curved structures on both the sides. They have a core of mesenchyme, that is mesoderm in the center, ectoderm on the outside, and internally by the endoderm. And then it, remember that the mesoderm of the pharyngeal apparatus, or the developing head and neck, comes from neural crest. Initially, it was your mesoderm, that is your paraxial mesoderm, but then later on, the neural crest cells, they migrate to the mesenchyme of these pharyngeal arches and give rise to the mesoderm of the head and neck. Each component pharyngeal arch, that is having its own structure, that is muscle, skeleton, nerves, and artery. Externally, the pharyngeal arches. Now, there are three structures which are formed. Externally is the pharyngeal arches. Those are ectodermal in origin. Got the grooves. Not the arches, but the grooves. They are the extradermal in origin. Then pharyngeal arches in the middle. That is mesenchymal, and on the inner side is the endoderm, which is the pharyngeal pouches, and where the three layers meet, that is pharyngeal membranes. That is called as branchial apparatus or the pharyngeal apparatus. So these three tell you what is an endoderm, or what is a pouch, what is a cleft, and what is an arch, and then what is the membrane. That this black thing which is encircled is what we call as a membrane. These are present in the neck. This is how it starts to develop. There are about 4 to 6 arches which are there. It contains, each has its own arch, has its own artery, muscle, nerve, and muscle which is there. So this shows you all what is there, how these are placed. The clefts, the first cleft, the four ones, first give only structure which is developed, that is the external ear, and then the depth of the external ear is the outer part of the eardrum that is formed by the first cleft. The second cleft does not form anything. The second one overgrows and covers the third and the fourth cleft, and so that surface on the outside of the neck becomes smooth. There is no opening. That is, and only a small pouch can be left, and that is what we call as cervical sinus. That is, the depth can be there. And if you see in this portion, this is the first cleft where it is written blue and on the outside. Then is the pharyngeal membranes. These pharyngeal membranes, these are where the epithelium grooves and pouches approach each other, and you see in the middle, because the cleft on the outside, that is ectoderm, endoderm is the pouch on the inner side, and this the lined portion in the center is your mesenchyme. Where these three meet, that is going to be called as the membrane. This only develops in the first membrane, that is going to give rise to the tympanic membrane, because it is contributing from the outside to the ectoderm, from the inside by the endoderm, and the middle by the mesenchyme. So all these three layers are forming your eardrum. So the nerve supply on the outer portion is going to be different, the middle is going to be different, and the inner side is going to be different, because the origin of the three sides is from different layers. Second, third, and fourth membranes, they form these clefts, they finish off, so they are not going to give rise to any structure. Then is the pharyngeal arches, important structures. The fate of the pharyngeal arches, there are 4 pharyngeal arches which are going to develop into something, and fifth and sixth, they are very rudimentary, not externally seen, but the sixth one still develops into the fourth, and the sixth, they develop some structures, all what is there on the pharynx. First arch has 2 components, maxillary and the mandibular. The cartilage is given the name as quadrate, and the Meckel's cartilage. The first maxillary cartilage is going to give rise to the maxilla, vomer bone, zygomatic, and the maxilla is basically membranous in ossification. The second part of this first arch is your mandibular one. This is the dorsal part, forms the 2 ossicles, malleus incus, middle forms the ligaments, and the ventral part is just going to be intramembranous cartilage, finishes off and forms the part of the mandible. Muscles, as you can see, and the nerve supply is your trigeminal nerve. Then is the second one. The second one forms JPs, the dorsal end. Middle forms just a one ligament, that is your stylohyoid ligament, and then the ventral one that forms your lesser cornu and the upper part of the body of the hyoid nerve. The nerve for this is the muscles which are there is trapezius, muscles of facial expression. So muscles of facial expression automatically motor supplies by the facial nerve. So second arch is nerve is facial nerve. Third arch, rudimentary, gives rise to the lower part of the body and the greater horn of the hyoid bone. You see this picture, this shows you the different parts. And then fifth is rudimentary, doesn't give rise to anything. Fourth and the sixth, they give rise to the laryngeal cartilages and the epiglottis. So muscles is third nerve is glossopharyngeal, fourth and sixth is by the vagus nerve. Okay. This picture shows you a collective representation of the different arches. These are all mesenchyme. These are the muscles which are arising. Shows you a diagrammatic picture by coloring different. That is each arch. Then the nerves which are there, nerves of each arch. This is the muscles plus the nerves which are supplying it collectively. They have been represented. And this is a table which is going to show you from each arch what skeleton is going to form, what muscles are going to form, and what is the nerve of that arch. Next time, inshallah, we'll start with the pouches, the pharyngeal pouches. That is the inner portion. If you see this, this again shows you this lining is by the endoderm, that is the yellow portion. Middle is again brownish is the mesenchyme. That is these all red, blue, brown structures. These are the nerves and the arteries which are supplying it. And then you have the clefts on the outside, and that is lined by the ectoderm. Okay, Ji, that finishes off the four structures. This is very important because you would be studying this with the oral people, oral biology people as well. But I have gone into much details because in anatomy, you this is the portion which is more related to you, and you have to know it thoroughly because you always get good questions. Okay.